So, welcome everybody to this webinar. We are starting now, and we are glad to have you all here. And there are coming more people in, but let's get started. So, we welcome you to this LIBER hosted webinar. Today we have two speakers, Robin Rice and John Southall, and they will speak about their views on data literacy and how to put this into practice. And a few technical things before we start. You will all be muted during the webinar, but of course you can use the chat to put some questions and comments. And afterwards, my colleague Rob will take up your questions, and yeah, we will have a discussion with the speakers. So, and our first speaker will be Robin Rice, data librarian and head of research data support at EDINA. And yeah, so Robin, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself and then get started.
Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
My first webinar, presenting one, so let's hope that's the end of the mistakes. So thank you very much to LIBER for inviting myself and John to talk about one of the chapters in our book, the Data Librarians Handbook, and that will be the open access chapter that you can get free online, supporting data literacy, appropriately enough. So the idea is that I'm going to talk about theory, which is really theory in inverted commas, just talking about supporting data literacy, so touching on similar topics that we did in the chapter. And then John is going to bravely bring in the practice side, talking about some of the recent initiatives that they've had at the Bodleian Library at Oxford, so that you can get some sense of sort of both sides, and then hopefully that will be enough stimulation to have a really good discussion afterwards. So here's an overview of what I plan to cover. Why is data literacy important today? Maybe I hardly need to ask that given strong attendance, so thank you everyone for coming along. You probably have your own ideas, and if I haven't already said, we do want to hear from you, because we don't really know who's out there in this webinar land, and it'd be really good to find out what you're thinking about these topics and what your experience is. So anyway, then we'll talk about data literacy within library instruction, so kind of data literacy as part of information literacy and how it can fit in. And we think that research data management must be part of data literacy, so we'll do a little bit about RDM, but we don't want to turn this over into a whole RDM session. I'm sure there'll be time for that elsewhere, and I think there already has been a LIBER webinar on 23 things in research data management. And then, so it's really just about kind of the data life cycle and ways that you can bring in research data management into the general library instruction. Then digging a little deeper, sort of some of the mechanics of data. What is it about data? What is it that we need to be literate when we're talking about data or data sets? And then what has statistical literacy got to do with it? We think it has quite a lot to do with it. There's no point in having lots and lots of access to data and a data deluge if people aren't making sense of it statistically. Of course, not all data is statistical, but certainly being able to understand the data that's presented and the statistical concepts behind it is part of what we mean by data literacy. And then, of course, what about data science? It can't really be ignored, but how does it fit in? How do we as librarians think about data science? Do we all need to become data scientists? or what do we think? And then really coming back to libraries and LIBER and what data skills we really need to move everything forward. So why do we think data literacy is important, and why is it particularly important today? Well, as sometimes happens, I just came across a report with this great infographic showing the importance of it in terms of jobs, which is always very hard to argue with that as a reason, and it really is very persuasive, strong statements being made out there. The big data marketplace will bring jobs and economic benefits to the UK and Europe. In 2012, economists predicted that 58,000 new jobs could be created each year in the UK. And, sorry, that's in the UK. And then big and open data could contribute 147 billion to annual GDP across the EU economies by 2020. And that's from a British Academy support, Count Us In, Quantitative Skills for a New Generation, in case you can't read that small print. So I know that everybody has heard these kinds of things, so I just wanted sort of one example of, to remind us, big data, open data, data science, data-driven science is really driving not only changes in the academic landscape, but also the entire economy. So it really is important. It's important for our students as well as existing researchers. So you say you want a data revolution. So you see we've got John Lennon and Tina Turner with cameo appearances in this talk. So I hope you find it entertaining. So what is it about this data revolution? So the number of people with these skills, and now I'm quoting from a European Open Science Cloud report, these skills meaning referring to people that they call core data experts, in some cases, and sometimes they call data stewards. The number of people with these skills needed to effectively operate the European Open Science Cloud is, we estimate, likely exceeding 500,000 within a decade. So you may have heard that sort of soundbite of 500,000 data scientists needed within 10 years. So how are we going to train up that whole cadre of data scientists, data stewards, or core data experts? And within that report, realizing the European Open Science Cloud, in the foreword by Berend Mons, it says the science system is in landslide transition from data sparse to data saturated. Meanwhile, scholarly communication, data management methodologies, reward systems, and training curricula do not adapt quickly enough, if at all, to this revolution. That's probably ringing bells with some people, especially librarians. It says that researchers, funders, and publishers keep each other hostage in a deadly embrace by continuing to conduct, publish, fund, and judge science in the same way as in the past century. So, hence the urgency and the mention of revolution and what exactly is being called for. We're after nothing less than overturning the entire system of scholarship. So if anybody says that's not revolutionary thinking, then I can challenge you. So that's the European Open Science Cloud. Probably a lot of you, or maybe all of you, have come across it, and we're going to keep coming across it. And there's kind of workshops and ways of getting involved all the time. They've got a stakeholder forum that I went to recently. There will be events coming real soon to you, and do pay attention, because what we really need is for librarians to be involved in the development of the European Open Science Cloud. It's kind of cloudy still, as somebody said at the workshop I was at, as to exactly what it is. Network of infrastructures. And we need to remember that libraries are part of that infrastructure, and we need to remind the scientists and the policymakers that that's the case. So another recent thing going on, you may have come across the new LIBER strategy, and I just sort of counted up the number of themes out of the 15 themes that seem directly related to data skills, and I probably could have added more if I was a little more liberal. But we have research data management, innovative metrics, diversifying digital skills of library staff members and researchers, digital cultural heritage and digital humanities, citizen science, semantic interoperability and openly linked data, and of course data stewardship. And the diagram on the right shows how that all fits in with the entire strategy. So we're very much on in terms of going ahead with data. So how can we put this into practice? And one of the first things that any librarians doing public service and coming across students and doing library instruction can think about how to insert data literacy into library instruction or information literacy training. And we kind of go over a number of ways in the chapter, including finding existing data sources. This is kind of the data librarians' traditional area of activity, people like John and myself. And it's been active with the social sciences, where people are looking for existing survey data or census data. But increasingly, as we change the culture and scientists are sharing data, scholars are making their inputs and outputs open, finding sources is some way we can help students on an ongoing basis. They don't have to always create their own data, do their own interviews. There's very exciting data sets out there that can be found, and we can help them find it. We know there's re3data.org, which is an entire group of growing repositories, data repositories. So then within that, talking to students about the difference between searching for literature and searching for data using tools like Google that they'll always use, or Google Scholar, promoting data citations so that more of those data records do get treated as items of scholarship and found in things like Google Scholar or your library search tools. So promoting data citation as a first-class research object is how they put it in the Force 11 data citation principles. And I'm sure you all know what that means, just making sure that data is cited with a full citation, just like literature. Who's the data creator? When was it published? And does it have a machine-readable identifier such as a DOI, so that people, so that it can be linked with the literature very smoothly, and you can go from literature to the data set and data set to the literature, just in the same way that we're used to going between cited articles in the literature now. Let's see. The other thing about finding existing sources and deciding whether to cite data, as in use data and then cite it in your own work, is the issue of judging quality of data for reuse. That's something librarians can talk to students about. What does the metadata say? What does the metadata tell you about the quality of the data set? Is it full metadata? Is it complete? Does it explain the provenance? Does it explain where the data came from? And does it explain how to use the data, or what the data mean and how it was collected? As we know, the more documentation, the more reusable this data. So jumping around on my bullet points there, it brings us to the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. What does that mean? That could be a lesson in itself with students. And all of these things about data site DOIs and judging quality and proper metadata is going to help. reproducibility principles, going beyond reuse to actually being able to reproduce someone else's research, or publishing your own research and data in a way that it could be replicated. I think that open data licenses is definitely something that librarians have to offer, because even people who are very up on issues about sharing and what can be shared and what can't be shared, researchers that I speak to, just the other day there was a group of students, they were very up on these issues, but when I asked if they knew what Creative Commons licenses were, they were completely blank. So I think that's something that's not being taught in the curriculum, and it's something that we can add ourselves to explain these different flavors of licenses and what a truly open license means. And then increasingly, we have to pay attention to legal issues of sharing with human subject data, making sure they understand the ethics of getting consent, not just for doing the research, but for collecting the data, and laws such as the General Data Protection Regulation that's coming into force in May, as we all know, and how that impacts on the ability to share research data. And you can even go more on understanding metadata, not just the metadata for discoverability, but for disciplinary standards such as the minimum information standards in biology, and what Dublin Core is, and so I think there's lots of room for just adding in some awareness of data into regular library instruction. And the quote on the right is supposed to underlie that that the EOSC, as they say, high-level expert group report that we spoke about, feels that the culture change that needs to happen is so much more important than any technological change for this open data landscape that an open science field that we're looking for. So librarians are in a good place to work on cultural change, and they don't have to worry about not knowing the technical details. In terms of RDM and bringing that in, a kind of surefire way is to use a data lifecycle. There's many data lifecycles out there. You can search around and find your favorite one. So right from create, document, use, and store, share, and preserve. Just trying to see if, sorry, I think you can see my whole screen, but I just wanted to see if there's any messages coming through to me. Okay, that's fine. I had a part of the screen turning yellow, so just checking on my messages from the presenter, from the host. So as you can see, this is a slide we use in our own training for students, where we describe the data life cycle and then describe the actions, that the research data management actions that need to be taken at each one of these stages. So that's really all I want to say about research data management, because if I start talking about research data management too much, I'll get into a whole sidetrack. And so what I've decided to make sure you have a chance to know about, if you don't know about it already, is some resources I've been involved in that explain more about research data management principles and training, both for researchers and for librarians. So we have Mantra with the URL there, openly licensed online self-paced learning in RDM. You can spend quite a lot of time in there, 1 hour per module if you include the further reading. So we designed it for postgrads and early career researchers at University of Edinburgh, and we've gotten good feedback that it's applicable to a wide variety of people and other institutions. So you're welcome to point students directly to it, or and staff, early career researchers, or you can download the reusable units and customize them and put them into a virtual learning environment, such as Moodle, if you like. And as long as you provide attribution, you can rebrand it and do whatever you want. And we try and make it fun to work through with interactive material. The text can be read quickly, including the transcripts of the videos, or people can watch the videos of the researchers talking about particular issues. And there's quizzes where people can check how they're doing. And there's some data handling exercises kind of on the side. This is what it looks like, and if you press the letter I, you can see a little preview of what is in that unit. Each unit, as I say, is designed to take up to an hour of your own self-paced time, so you can pick and choose which units you need. If you're a librarian, you might be interested in the sharing, preserving, and licensing, and the data protection rights and access, which is what we tell people with the avatars up there in the top right. On the other hand, maybe that's the stuff that you know really well, and you want instead to make sure you're up on file formats and transformation or something like that. That's a bit more researchy. Then we have the MOOC as well, a Coursera MOOC that we got involved with UNC Chapel Hill in providing these 5 topics, and it actually as well, it's sort of 2 differences from Mantra. It has video lessons, and it's also aimed at researchers and librarians even more than Mantra. And it talks a lot about the archiving data. The Odom Institute Data Archive is one of the people who was involved. And so it gets into a lot more of the digital preservation aspects that we kind of skip over in Mantra, because our main point in Mantra is to get researchers to put their data into a trusted repository. And this is what that resource looks like. And the video lectures are provided by Helen Thibault from University of North Carolina and Sarah Jones from the Digital Curation Center for the Edinburgh content. And so moving on, because I don't want to skip into John's time. Understanding the mechanics of data. We have data structures and formats. So things like spreadsheet data, which we would call rectangular, understanding rows and columns. Usually the cases are by rows and the variables are by columns. Or you might have a database structure where there's several tables and they're related to each other through a common ID. Images are interesting because it could be very much on the humanities side of things or the cultural data side of things, but it's also very important for scientific images, things coming off of scanners and things. So there's standards, of course, that make the best formats for sharing images and audio-visual. Understanding how to preserve these kind of data and what are the best formats. Text, the kinds of data manipulation you can do with text-based data, the kinds of tools that exist. And of course, I have to mention big data, which I guess for this purpose would often mean streaming data, either things coming straight off instruments or like what we call the Twitter fire hose from social media. Things that are streaming all the time and need to be analyzed according to that, and considered unstructured data. And in terms of understanding the mechanics of data, software code becomes very important. And I'd also want to draw your attention to this data carpentry courses that are taught. It started in the US, but it's gone worldwide. It's very popular. And you can get trainers by contacting the organization, or you can reuse the material that's on the web. And it's very popular with the students because it's teaching them what they think they need to know now, like open source software code like R and if you go into software carpentry as well, it's Python and OpenRefine. And there's even a library carpentry you may have come across, which is about getting librarians. It's really just about taking any discipline and applying these tools. So it might be librarians, or it might be biologists, or it might be social scientists. And the courses can be customized for any of those groups. And it's a great way to learn to just even dabble in code and databases and find out what data is all about if you haven't done research yourself. So I'm going to move very quickly on to statistical literacy, and just to point out with this rough guide to spotting bad science on the right, all of the things that can go wrong and all the reasons why you and students need to be statistically literate, even just for reading the newspaper and regular things in the world and being a good citizen. In fact, there's this idea that statistical literacy is about that kind of consumption of reading statistics, and it's different than statistical competence, which is another level. It takes a lot more study to be statistically competent. That doesn't have to be your aim. You can aim just to be statistically literate, be able to read tables and graphs, understand when you look at a study whether there's a big enough sample size for this to be making generalizable results about a population, and whether there's confounding variables that make correlations. People draw conclusions about correlations, cause and effect, that aren't really there. It's also about understanding probability, of course, statistics is, and on the next slide I'll just mention something about the null hypothesis. So science is innately skeptical. Hypothesis testing is about proving the likelihood results are not due to chance. So in this XKCD comic, we have a number of studies about jelly beans and acne, and lo and behold, it's the green jelly bean that gets linked to acne. But is that really is it significant? It has a 95% confidence, and it's on that 5% line of subject to chance. But maybe it is chance if we do enough studies over and over again. And that little link down in the bottom is well worth reading, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False, by John Ioannidis, who kind of turned the field topsy-turvy in terms of chasing p-values and what it means to be statistically significant. It's kind of become a controversy. And then, so getting into data science a little bit before we get right out again. You may have seen some of these Venn diagrams with data science and domain expertise, computer science, and maths or statistics, and where it intersects. So that's kind of useful, and there's a lot of debate about what exactly the Venn diagram is. The one on the right doesn't even use a Venn diagram. It just has all these factors pointing. So I think, clearly we can't be experts in all of those things. I pressed the button too far. I've lost... Someone's getting it back for me, I think. I think it's loading. Certainly on my screen, it says the Adobe Presenter is loading. I'm looking to my... Okay. So the slide, you all can see the slide, but I can't see the slide, so that's fine. I think that's fine. It's coming back anyway. Okay, I'm going to not use the space bar again. I'm going to use the arrow like I should. And on to the next slide. What data skills do librarians have or need? And so my number one message is critical thinking goes a long way. As librarians, we can always skill up. And in fact, we must, because whatever we learned in library school it's a long time from then. and we need to keep up. We know that many of the attributes of librarians are just right for this new culture change that the EOSC report points to, that's needed for data-driven science and scholarship. We can understand as well as anyone the importance of open data as a public good, and we can get across the benefits of sharing to all new researchers, helping to drive that culture change. And we can facilitate interdisciplinary work better than scientists who are used to working in a particular domain. And we can do that matchmaking, not only between different disciplines, but between researchers and data, matching up researchers with repositories. And we can practice in our own, we want our own services to be more data-driven, so we can practice with our own metrics, collecting data, analyzing data. We can use these same tools, and we can understand them better through our own practice.
Hello there. Thank you, Robin. Thank you very much. This is John Southall here, speaking to you from Oxford. For my segment, I thought it would be interesting to build on some of the issues we discussed in the book, and actually Robin's just outlined very well by looking at developments in my own institution, University of Oxford, and with my own library service, which is called the Bodleian Libraries. So in my session, I'll be looking at the approaches we've taken to reskilling librarians, thinking about engagement with wider RDM support, following on from that, looking at how we've tried to embed RDM training and the notion of a Bodleian as being central to RDM with our colleagues here, and then also finish off by looking at some of the other kind of approaches we've taken over in training, which is turning briefings or new roles within the University of Oxford. So looking at reskilling librarians at Bodleian, first of all. First idea was to begin a program of simple introductions to RDM. And the key thing here, I guess, was to think about gearing it to a particular landscape of a university. For those of you who don't know, Bodleian Libraries actually is a network of about 58 to 60 libraries, depending on how you refer to them. So there's a lot of large, small libraries, lots of librarians working here. And we were also aware that there was also a very effective staff development system in place here. So we approached colleagues in staff development and talked to them about how we could kind of best deliver training and this notion of reskilling for data management to colleagues in the Bodleian. And we wanted to do it across the divisions, not just in the social sciences division or medical sciences or humanities and so forth. So it had to be discipline agnostic. We knew there would be a high proportion of part-time staff as well. So we threw that into a mix as well, you know, making sure we kind of made whatever training we did as open and available to as many staff as possible. And for that reason, we decided basically to run it twice termly. Mix up this was so on different days, different times of day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, so we could attract this type of audience. So the training delivery then was integrated with the staff development system, which meant we benefited from the fact it was going to be advertised along with other staff training. We could make use of existing booking and feedback mechanisms which were already in place and worked very well, and which most members of staff within the Bodleian were familiar with. They were used to kind of looking at weekly or monthly announcements, what training was kind of coming up. And perhaps just as importantly, it meant when colleagues did take part in the training, it would be entered into their training record. So line managers kind of see what training they were doing and keep a note of that and discuss that during one-to-one sessions afterwards. It also meant we could make use of the feedback mechanisms that staff development had built into it. And already from the kind of from the initial sessions we did, we started doing this about 4 years ago. And from the initial sessions we did, it became clear that those who undertook the research training, research data management training, felt they came away with a kind of at the very least, an improved familiarity with what was meant by research data management. And perhaps importantly for them, they could start to get a sense of actually how it worked and what place it had in their own day-to-day activity within their own particular libraries. Okay, so to be honest, some were less sure, perhaps some weren't as clear as to how useful it would be for them, if they maybe in the humanities or in the natural sciences perhaps, but they were happy to be informed. I mean, and again, this kind of did throw up the interesting point that, as was reported to us, in some divisions, in the social sciences division, for example, a lot of librarians have been asked about issues which they realised could be described as being relevant to data management, whilst other librarians in maybe the medical sciences division or natural sciences were having less questions we thought thrown at them. And this, I think, might be a reflection of the fact that some disciplines basically are handling these issues more themselves, and they don't feel the need to kind of look for support or research support from the library if it's something they feel is fundamental to their own discipline already. But anyway, overall, though, I think the important point is that many of the colleagues were doing this training and reporting afterwards in their feedback that they felt they're getting better data literacy, that they're more confident in what data management meant and what data literacy meant, because we were talking about data management and also kind of data as data access, data preservation, data use as an integral part of their work. Now, after that, though, I think, as I say, we've been doing that for a number of years now, and we're beginning to think that, in practical terms, we want to start moving away from introductions to data management and introductions to data literacy. We want to start thinking about how we can actually sustain this kind of work and start building a better engagement with it, perhaps, for those who work within the libraries. So we start this by building on a reskilling. In many cases, librarians are in a position to put this new knowledge into practice alongside their more usual library expertise. So in other words, moving from an awareness of data literacy and data management to an actually a closer engagement with it. They're building on reskilling in this way. And what form can this increasing engagement take? Well, it might actually simply be, which means they're dealing with research questions as part of their usual research interviews or consultations, and questions to do with data preservation, data storage, which perhaps in the past they might have just simply told readers or their audience to kind of take up with IT services or the equivalent institution. Rather than saying that, they're actually saying, this is something we can advise on, or we can point you towards the data management infrastructure which is here, which the library's taking an interest, which can actually help you with those kind of questions. Similarly, they might be in a position where they're talking about citation or bibliographic management tools, and it's also then a good opportunity to start talking about citation in the form of data citation and data management, as well as bibliographic management for the researcher. There are clear and useful tools becoming available, and DMP tools of various sorts. I mean, the DCC, DMP Online, for example, or DMP tool in the US are simple examples of that. And the feedback we got from the reskilling sessions show that for many colleagues within the library, simply being aware of those tools was a useful thing. It meant I could actually start talking about data management planning and actually suggest that during consultations, if they're talking to researchers, suggest they should be looking at these tools and thinking about putting together data management plans of one sort or another. Just lost my screen. Oh, let's wait back again. So again, talking about this thing of awareness and engaging more fully with the institution. Here at Oxford, we have a number of data management projects which are kind of led to things like Aura Data, which is our own institutional data repository. So the reskilling is involved basically informing participants in these courses that Aura Data is in existence, telling them about how it works, how it integrates with the work they're used to. And of course, most colleagues are used to approaching data from the point of view of being a resource, something to access, something to make use of. So them knowing that we have our own data repository, which perhaps emphasizes at a moment the role of researchers putting data into it, them knowing it's there means they can also talk to colleagues about depositing there for once and talk to researchers about doing this, but also talk to researchers about using all the data as a source of data. So basically they're advocating its use, they're engaging with the data management infrastructure we have here. They have they don't have to become experts in how it works. We have many people working within the repository itself who can kind of give, in-depth explanations of how it works, but just having a top-level understanding of it, how it can be contacted, for example, what its basic operating requirements are, can be very useful. And as I say, this is another example of how many of these things, which may sometimes be tempted to introduce to librarians as being new things or new areas of expertise or new areas of familiarity we need to develop, they do in fact, they can in fact be easily associated with things they're already used to working with, talking about resource access or licensing conditions, for example. In terms of subscription resources, isn't that much different from talking about accessing and licensing data to go into a repository. The other thing we talk about is Research Data Oxford, which is the main research data management infrastructure we have here at Oxford. So again, we're simply kind of being able to kind of tell colleagues they can kind of go away and promote and point to the websites, the information packs, the training we have as part of RDM. And in fact, one of the things we've had some, again, small success, but significant, I think, is integrating information on Research Data Oxford with the existing library or subject consultant managed LibGuides. So here's an example here. This is a series of guides which kind of made available. This is for one for sociology, made available for researchers and staff to use here at Oxford. It's been in place for a number of years now, and after discussions about data management and these reskilling sessions, many subject consultants have decided to add tabs to the existing framework. So there's tabs on finding journal articles, ebooks, references, theses and dissertations, news data statistics, and so forth, additional archives, and simply adding in a tab for managing research data is another way of kind of addressing that need for data literacy. Another example here from engineering to kind of show a way you can kind of cut across and use in different ways. We're asking subject consultants who are interested in improving their data literacy to think about how data management and data literacy is relevant to their own disciplines. And this is an example of actually how they can kind of take their own LibGuides and think about what we want to kind of pull out, what we want to kind of create. So this one, for example, in engineering, it looks at data repositories specific to engineering, fixed shares in Nodo and so forth. It looks at some management tools and useful contacts. But moving on, the other thing we wanted to kind of do in practice is think about, we're getting library consultants to apply their understanding of data management with their subjects. Good. And within the Bodleian, we're having more and more success in refining and further developing this training. So the next steps, refining initial training. We're looking for gaps for further innovation, for gaps where there's needs to be met. And we're using the existing intelligence gathering and sharing infrastructure, as to say, the subject consultant network, to inform us, to give us feedback on where they feel more support is needed in supporting data use, data preservation, data literacy, if you like. They're making them attuned to data, if you like, in ways which they were not previously. So we're making use of the subject consultant network. And again, I can point to a recent example, talking with colleagues who'd attended some of the kind of introductory sessions I did on reskilling for data for librarians. They were from the medical sciences division, and they asked to have more tightly focused sessions created just for medical sciences, just for librarians there, who they felt were issues particular to their own discipline, which needed more attention. So we've had some success in putting those in place. In other ways, you can kind of think about sustaining the training you're doing by way of actually kind of creating this tailored, this specialized, this bespoke training. And again, this is one of the things we've seen here. We're getting more and more involved with special events, special briefings for those receiving funding, for those working to deadlines within departments where data management is becoming an issue. They're coming to us within the library for advice on this, as well as colleagues in research services or IT services. Some examples I can think of recently, of receiving invitations to attend presentations as part of workshops of postgraduates applying for ESRC funding, for example, or going on to do briefings for departmental administrators on the latest Welcome Trust and Horizon 2020 RDM policy. So this is promoting data management issues and data literacy issues through meeting needs specific to an institution. They're not seeing it as training as such. They're seeing it as the library performing its traditional role of actually lending support, filling in the gaps it needs in that support. And the important thing to take away from that is establishing the library as a first point of contact for data management, for data literacy. Other initiatives, when we keep thinking about how we're going to kind of sustain this interest in data, is to put in place termly briefings at Bodleian. So as well as the regular training which kind of goes on, which of course is a one-shot deal, one person attends it, and they probably don't feel need to kind of go again once they've done that. But briefings are things they go to regularly. So it keeps the data management and data literacy in view, if you like, in view of colleagues within Bodleian. It means we try and keep it relevant to the needs of librarians and readers when we put together the agenda for these events. And because we're getting feedback and we're getting suggestions of things to kind of include, it means we can actually also, well, feedback into that training content we're putting together. Okay? And the form it takes at the moment is that we have termly dated briefings, usually about an hour in length, every term. So we have one in Michaelmas, Hillary, and Trinity term. We talk about kind of, leading issues of concern. It might be one where there's a theme around data management planning. It might be one where there's a theme about changes to LibGuides, approaches to working with LibGuides. But we also kind of we find it useful to include invited speakers from data-centric researchers at Oxford to kind of give colleagues in the libraries a taste of the kind of research that's going on, that how data is being used in practice, as it were, on the shop floor, if you like. And again, this is another aspect of data literacy, I think, widening the perspective of librarians to see where their role is within a larger context, a larger landscape. It also means we can kind of do briefings and updates on changes within the data, research data object, Oxford infrastructure, changes to the information websites we have, changes within all the data and repository. And just as importantly, as I say, hear from them interests and concerns of a data sort they might have. So in effect, the most important takeaway from that, I think, is it is actually creating a dialogue on data access management and preservation. It's moving away from this kind of top-down information training to an ongoing dialogue. And a few more practical examples then, new roles. What new roles have been created as part of these initiatives? Well, we can point to one as putting in place data stewards. They're often within certain departments or within certain divisions. There's been identified a need for data to be continued, to have it administered, looked after a project. Traditionally, when maybe those who've created the data have moved on elsewhere, moved on to other projects, there's a need, if you like, for a data sharing co-pilot, a role within a department or within the library where someone can kind of be able to offer an opinion on accessing that data, basically. Some research councils have a requirement that for up to 2 years or 3 years after the research project finishes, there needs to be a potential audit, if possible, taken out. So it needs to be someone responsible for the data. At the moment, we're kind of defining this on a case-by-case basis. It's been reported to us by subject consultants from my colleagues in research services. There was a need for this kind of role. So we've come up with this kind of solution, point where appropriate, data stewards, not a named person, but a named role to basically have this responsibility, as long as they have a kind of appropriate documentation and information and context about the data set in question. The key, though, is it's kind of created a number of useful precedents. First of all, that there is such a thing as a data steward, this administrative role, and also that the library can advise on where it's appropriate to have a data steward. In collaboration, perhaps with colleagues in research services, of course, it means the library has something to say about it. They often, these roles tend to be kind of appointed within departments. Occasionally, though, if the department itself is quite a small one and they're worried about kind of what's involved in doing this, we might actually step in and say the library, in its traditional role as the curator of material for posterity, can actually step into a beach and take that role as well. But so we're working on a case-by-case basis. It's for day-to-day library interaction, which is very helpful in this, I think. Kind of, you get feedback and we get an involvement, not only directly with researchers for the libraries, but also with wider consultative committees at Oxford. You know, the libraries usually have a place on ethics committees, on discussions with departmental committees of one sort or another, where again we can kind of gauge feelings around the need and the usefulness of this role. So we're making use of the specialised knowledge very often of colleagues here within the Bodleian. I can point to another example of specialised role being put together, and this is one we haven't created as such. We're in the process of developing, and this is the notion of having building on some of the kind of the gaps we've identified and the demands or requests we've had from readers. One of these is within economics, my own area of specialism as a subject consultant, is to have someone in place with specialist expertise in working with and handling financial data. So as I say, this is a role in development. There's definitely a gap there. We feel that should be addressed somewhere, and the library itself wants to address that. So we're looking at putting in place a new post to do that. As to say, we want to get someone who has recent expertise in working with financial data of this sort and handling financial data. It will integrate with the current approach we take with having research consultations or research interviews, and it'll be someone who's kind of working probably in liaison with someone, with myself basically, a subject consultant for economics, within the social science library, and perhaps also the business librarian in the Sainsbury Library at the Said Business School. It's interesting to reflect, though, on my last couple of slides, that at the moment we are kind of looking for a financial data specialist. We were assuming it would be kind of specifically for the use within economics and the business school. But as we've been making more and more data of this sort available, or rather promoting its availability, I should say, we're seeing as much wider use and a much wider demand for data across all disciplines. What we might refer to as, business intelligence or financial data, and we assume it might just be of interest to economists or to those in the business school. We're now managing to kind of chart access from across disciplines, people in sociology, history, geography, social policy, medicine, migration studies, education, etc., all making requests for it. So I think it's kind of showing how there's a greater need. It actually reinforces the need for a data specialist, because we're now moving towards a situation where this data is being accessed within a practical library context by people who have less and less experience of actually working with it. So we need more and more support from us, not from IT services perhaps alone, but from us within the library to make proper and appropriate use of that data. And you can also reflect on the fact that funders, when talking about how they want to encourage and emphasize the role of data creators in preparing their own data for sharing and reuse, after it's been shared, when it is actually being reused, how is it actually going to be supported? It's the academic libraries who will be playing a key role in delivering it. Supporting data handling becomes, in a sense, another facet of data literacy. That's my final slide, so over to you. Questions or comments, I think.
Thanks, John, and thanks both. Robin, I have a question for you first. Well, going back to the beginning, the need for a handbook for data librarianship. Can you elaborate a little bit on that in, well, how this book came about and your experiences with writing it?
Oh, okay. Well, I can't take the credit for the idea because it was really the Facet publisher's idea. And they approached me about doing it. I guess the profile of data librarians had risen to a level where someone noticed there wasn't a book on the topic. Or actually there was kind of. But and of course our book was written and published in the same year that the Data Librarians Theory and Practice book was also published, so it was sort of coming to a point. But I think what the publisher noticed is that a lot of the books that had been written about research data management were written by experts, kind of for experts. And I think they put their finger on a real need, which was, especially for people starting out in the field or working solo, as often happens, was that we need some real practical guidance. So so I paired up with John, and we tried to be as practical as we could, trying to think about how we solve problems when things come across to us in the everyday service, and putting in those reflective questions and lessons at the back of the book for at the back of each chapter to try and make it more, and having lots of headings so that busy professionals could skim to the part that they wanted to see and things like that. So I think it was an attempt to bring the level of discourse down to a very down-to-earth practical level rather than sort of up in the sky sort of high-level theory.
Thanks. Well, given the little time that we have, I have a question for you both in how to best advertise the training and the services. John, to start with?
Yes,
it's a question
yes.
From
As I was saying during my slides, the key thing is not to try and reinvent the wheel, is to think about how existing services of one sort or another are already being promoted within your own institution, either direct from the library or within departments. Look at what training is already being provided and just basically see what you can piggyback on. Robin, you any thoughts?
Well, I would say if you can develop some services in the first place, to have something to promote, and you might do that in partnership with researchers to figure out what is really needed, and just try and make yourself visible to them at the point of need, which is never easy, whether it's the right place in the overall website or places in the overall website, or showing up at staff meetings for 5 minutes to make a plug for coming back for a bigger longer session. These are very busy people, these academics, and so you need to find ways to kind of insert yourself into their daily life and make it present the message in ways that speak to their real needs and the gaps of what they're unable to do at the moment.
That's a very good point, Robin. I think you have to get used to the idea of feeling that you've kind of covered a particular issue or set of issues, only to have someone in the department come back to you and ask exactly the same kind of advice, 6 months later, simply because they now have a need for it. People become so deaf to a lot of these things simply because they're so busy, as Robin says. But when they're actually seen as filling a gap that they have, they kind of suddenly want to kind of come and start talking to you about it again.
Okay. I think, yes, since we're close to 3 o'clock Central Europe time, I think we don't want to go over 3 o'clock. Yeah, I have many more questions left, and I think additional questions are coming in. Might be a good idea to put them in the chat, and that we will cover them later. Also, now contacting the host, Friedel. I think we need to stop. What do you think? Yeah, if you like. Okay. Then let's take one more question then. All right. One of the questions I saw coming in is whether a data steward needs to have a specific disciplinary background, yes or no? John, to start with?
My view is actually no.
Okay.
It should no. It should simply be an administrative one, as long as they have the appropriate documentation and information at hand to allow them to make decisions.
So my answer, I kind of skipped over it quickly in the slides. I don't think they have to come from a particular disciplinary background. I kind of like librarians getting involved in data librarianship, but if, as is typical, I think the numbers back me up, they come from the humanities background, because let's face it, librarians like reading, and that might be why we get into the field in the first place. Then it's good to pick up some data skills, and it works the other way too. John and I both know people in our iAssist organization of data professionals where it's ex-researchers who have come to the library field, but then they're picking up knowledge about metadata and classifying information and scholarly communication that librarians already know. So it's definitely a coming from any which way and filling in the gaps of what you don't know, and just being confident that what you do know will help you, and being willing to learn more.
Okay, all clear. Thank you both on my behalf. I now give back to Birgit to close the webinar. Birgit, are you there?
Yeah. So yeah, then let's thank you very much, Robin and John, for these excellent presentations. And yeah, let's close the webinar. Of course, the recordings will be made available later today or tomorrow, and we put the links which have been in the chat, of course, also in the announcement for your record. So thank you all, and have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Thanks for showing
See you
up.
next time.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, of course, we will have new topics.
Bye, thank you.